Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search builds great teams by connecting lawyers in Texas with career opportunities at small and boutique law firms. So if you're thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel here back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. I hope you and your family are both healthy and safe. And before we get started, I just want to mention that we literally have fantastic law firm opportunities all over the state and in a variety of practice areas. So I'm not going to list them today just because there's too many I want to get into our episode. But if you're interested or you're thinking about making some type of move, then please reach out and I can share more about those opportunities. All right, today we are in Austin where our guests are Wendy Larson and Jered Matthysse. Both Wendy and Jered are shareholders at Pirkey Barber, a law firm that focuses on trademark, copyright, and other soft intellectual property law. Jered focuses on litigation and policing of trademarks, frequently handling cases in federal court as well as in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office Trial and Appeal Board. He was a Texas Super Lawyers Rising Star 4 times and is now a Texas Super Lawyer. Jered was named a Best Lawyers in America Intellectual Property, Litigation, and Trademark Law for the past 5 years. Wendy also practices litigation, and especially within the areas of internet, cyber squatting, and brand protection challenges involving social media platforms and social media applications. Wendy's list of honors include Texas Super Lawyers for 5 straight years, Best Lawyers in America in Trademark for 10 straight years, and Lawyer of the Year for IP litigation in Austin just this past year in this current year, I should say, in 2021. All right, with that, let's hop into our conversation with Wendy and Jered on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Wendy Larson and Jered Matthysse join us right now. Jered, Wendy, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having us. It's going to be fun. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm as well. And so to get started, Wendy, why don't you tell us a little bit about your firm and your practice and what you all do?
Sure. So our firm is Pirkey Barber, and we are headquartered in Austin, Texas, and we have another office out in the DC area in Tyson's. And we have growing so fast. I'm losing track. Jered can help me. I think we have 35, 36 attorneys now.
Closing in on 40.
Yeah. Wow. So the firm has been around since 2006. It was a group of 4 attorneys at the time that left a larger firm and started a trademark firm. That was all they did was trademark law and a little bit of copyright law. And since then, the firm has grown, and we do a lot. We still specialize in trademark law and copyright as well. And we are soon to grow a little bit into a different category, which I am not permitted to speak about right now. But maybe you'll have us back and we can talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
Stay tuned.
That's for the paid subscribers. Get the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm just kidding. We don't have any paid subscribers.
So I joined the firm when it was about 9 months old, and I've seen it and been part of it since it has grown. And it's a really, really fun place to practice law, and excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. Jered, how about you? Do you want to add what your particular area is and some of that?
Yeah, very similar to Wendy. We were both 2 of the first attorneys to come on board from outside of the former firm that Pirkey Barber came from. Wendy was the very first one in 2007, and then I came on board in 2009. And so we've both been here for, over a decade, which is crazy. And It's crazy how much we've grown, even just over the last year or two. We've added over half a dozen new attorneys, a number of new partners, kind of like Wendy was saying, expanding our practice into really all of the soft IP, not just trademarks, but copyrights advertising law, right of publicity, and then a pretty cool, fun new area that we're about to get into that Wendy mentioned that will leave as a teaser.
Oh, man, see, I was okay when Wendy mentioned it the first time. I was okay. Now you just kind of did it again. Now I gotta really want to know now. Well, and then I meant to mention this too, or ask about it, but we were talking just before we started recording about how time kind of flies. But you also moved into nice new offices within the last year, right? As well.
Yes. No. Yeah. Actually, this, for anyone who's looking at this part of it, this is the office I'm in right now. We've kind of partially open. But yeah, it's been a blessing and a curse. The blessing being the office is incredible and the area is amazing, but the curse being we were shut down like 8 months after we opened the office up. But we've learned a lot about working remotely, but we're in a cool new area of Austin, the east side, that's really been kind of growing exponentially. All of Austin is, but this area in particular. And all the offices are the same size. Partner and associate offices are the same size. You can see there's glass on the outside to allow a lot of sunlight into the interior of the office, where we have some more open space than I think normal firms normally have. So it's been great, and a lot of different meeting areas and conference rooms. And we actually just sent an email out today about kind of slowly getting back to some normal over the course of the summer. So it'll be nice to have folks back in here. Awesome.
Well, talk a little about what is going on in the IP world, and are there things that you're tracking or that are new, or things that your clients are coming to you with that are sort of new areas, or I'm trying to think through like what would be at the CLE at the State Bar this summer on soft IP. What would be some of those hot topics that might come up, Jered?
Yeah, no, I'll toss out one, and Wendy might have a couple others. But one thing that Wendy and I have talked about before that we've seen a number of different clients raise, which is pretty, I think pretty cutting edge in the industry in general, in any industry, is the NFTs.
I'm so glad you mentioned it, because I'm going to have much more questions about it. So, okay, go.
Yeah, so the non-fungible tokens, which I knew almost nothing about earlier this year.
Yeah,
also
a month ago for me. So yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And there's literally artwork going for $67 million that's a digital coin. So it's basically Bitcoin in terms of how it's encoded, but for various objects, of which there is only one, but it's digital. And so our clients in the trademark and brand sphere have had issues come up where either A, they want to get into it, or B, they're seeing someone, for instance, an apparel client of ours, they're selling NFTs of their shoes. And so is that an infringement? It's this digital item and it looks like their shoe. So probably. And so we're dealing with these new issues.
Yeah.
And kind of, there's always these new issues where there were domain names and then social media. And
yes.
And this is clearly the next one. But it has come up from a bunch of clients, which has been pretty fascinating and makes me feel very old too. Because we had one younger associate here who was like, yeah, I collect them, and I was like, I have no idea what this even is. So those are interesting to say
Absolutely.
the least. I actually just bought. I didn't tell you this, Wendy. I bought a pack of basketball cards on NFTs
on NBA Top Shot.
Yeah, on Top Shot.
Yeah. No, that's
it was actually the young associate's doing. He convinced me to do it.
So that's the first thing that I saw was that like a month and a half ago. And so I kind of played around and tried to figure out what that was. And then just this week, I was also following along with, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a entrepreneur marketer, Gary Vaynerchuck, who he's got a bunch of clients. I mean, that he does, it's sort of Madison Avenue marketing, but it's from a social, he was kind of one of the first ones to do social. But so he put out an NFT project this week. I mean, there's tokens. You can go check. I'll send you the link after this because you'll be interested.
Yeah.
But he created an entire 10,000 token NFT project that's on Ethereum blockchain and that has things tied to it. Like he's going to put on a mega conference for 3 years, and anyone that has a token, that's the ticket. Like he's not selling tickets. Like that's the ticket. So basically they're auctioning. He's Dutch auctioning them. So high to low, basically right now. Like you can go see some of the stuff right now. It's going, but all it is he's just doodled like these characters, and his plan is to like develop like IP around these characters over the next like 40 years. He's got a massive social media following, and he's New York Times best-selling author, the whole thing. So he's got the audience to do stuff like this. But like, it's really interesting, and I've learned so much just kind of tracking along and following. I will probably try to snatch one of those tokens tomorrow. I've kind of got my eye on one in particular that's releasing tomorrow. But anyway, yeah, it's super fascinating. I'm interested to see where it goes.
It's really interesting, and yeah, you're seeing trademark applications starting to be filed covering that sort of stuff, and I'm sure we'll start seeing at some point this year, if not this year, next year, but probably this year, lawsuits being filed over IP being used inside of the digital coins that's owned by someone else, and then how do you define that? It's very, very interesting.
Yeah. Wendy, have we left anything out that's new that we haven't touched on? I mean, sorry, I took over that.
I think NFTs are probably the newest thing I could speak to for sure. And Jered did a much better job of even like talking at all about, using the correct terminology than I can even hope. But it's one thing that's really neat about our practice. And one thing before I sort of committed to this firm as a specialist effectively in trademark laws, I was concerned that it was too nichey. It's so narrow. Am I pigeonholing myself? But like that is like exhibit A of why this practice, or one of the reasons why it's so fun and challenging, is there's always something new. Even though it's the same law and the same principles, it's really neat that there's always a new technology. There's always something new to learn. And there's many points where I'm like, man, this no day is the same as the last. So, but that's a great example of it for sure.
Yeah. And Wendy, also something I wanted to ask you about with regards to this practice area is, it is one, and I kind of reflect back to the years that I spent at the law school where a lot of students would be interested in IP law, and sometimes they didn't really know what they were specifically saying when they said that. Some did, some didn't. And if they didn't have kind of the tech background in undergrad or science background in undergrad to go into patent prosecution or that kind of thing, they were often thought they were kind of shut out of the IP world kind of all together. And it's something that over time, I think is sort of just, I've kind of had to educate quite a few people on, some different routes to go in IP. But at the same time, to your point earlier about soft IP, especially being niched down in a small area, there aren't a lot of, you're a large firm in this space, relatively. So like, how do you, talk, how would you talk to someone who's, our audience is in practice now at this point, but maybe a couple of years in, still don't know maybe what they want to do for the rest of their lives yet. And this is an area of interest. How does someone, start to, plug into this area? Maybe if they're at a firm that doesn't do this work, what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I agree with kind of all the sort of premises you've laid. We, in connection with our recruiting efforts, we often come across folks with that talk about that they don't have the engineering background or whatever. So I'll just start by saying I was a psychology major, so clearly a hard sciences background to be in this field. So obviously the intellectual property umbrella is there are several categories that fall within it. Of course, patent law being one of them. I don't practice patent law, don't have any desire to, I'm not qualified to. Trademark law, copyright law, you don't need a hard science background at all for that. And then like trade secrets are typically sort of paired up often with patent type issues. So those will sometimes go hand in hand, but those are typically in state court, and that can be sort of a different beast altogether. And then other things like rights of publicity and things like that. That is something that we delve into a little bit, but again, doesn't require a hard science background at all. However, a lot of patent attorneys practice trademark law as well. So that might be part of the misconception, is that you will sometimes come across, firms where they say, well, if you want to practice IP law, that's everything. That's going to be patent law and trademark law and copyright. So you need the hard sciences background to be practicing patent law. So, but where our firm is really unique in that, and there are a few other firms that kind of do what we do and really specifically focus only on the trademark law issues. But you don't need that at all. You don't need any kind of hard sciences background. With respect to your question about how to get into it now, I think it's helpful for me to kind of think of who has actually done that in our firm. There's been a few people that have lateraled over without the trademark kind of specialty ahead of time. And Jered can kind of help me fill in any gaps. But I would say that what we really look for in those folks is that they typically were a few years in, probably not like, partner level. By then it's probably, they've got their own specialization at that point. But it's typically someone who's been practicing a few years in litigation. I would say litigation is at least in our case, those have been the folks that they know the federal rules of civil procedure really well. They're really good writers. That's a huge thing that we look for, because a lot of what we do is in writing. We do look for folks that have kind of like the mock trial, like training like that and trial experience in hearings, but that's very, very secondary to, or tertiary to being a good writer. I would say that is being a good writer, especially writing briefs, writing sort of explanations of a lot of clients in a really succinct, very efficient way is something that we highly value. So the folks that we've brought over from sort of the bigger firms were just, very excellent grades, but I would say even more than that, they've been litigators and they're really good writers. They're kind of generalists, at least the examples that I can think of right now.
Yeah. And that's, I'm glad that you said that, because I think sometimes another misconception might be, if someone's looking into the soft IP world, is that it would maybe more connect with a transactional practice or something like that. Just, I don't know. I'm thinking like the mentality and or maybe like from the standpoint of, filing for protection of stuff, like not necessarily litigating, but kind of establishing the trademarks or the copyrights or whatever else like that. So how much of the practice is adversarial litigation? We talked earlier about cease and desist stuff when it comes to people in NFTs, whatever, versus more of a kind of transactional nature of a practice, or kind of how does that split out? And do lawyers do both of those simultaneously for a client, or is it kind of split out between these are our folks that kind of do one thing, these are folks that do the litigation type stuff?
I would say, well, the last time I kind of looked at the numbers and how it's split out, I would say that it is pretty even at our firm. That you do have people that are on the litigation policing side versus people on the counseling transactional side. Okay, there is always some overlap here and there, and we encourage our junior folks to do both at the beginning, and that's for a couple reasons. One is to see what they're good at and where their strengths lie. But also it's super important to understand, for example, how an application becomes a registration and is well positioned to be defended when you're in the position of a litigator. So it's really important to understand like all the different phases at the Patent and Trademark Office. It's helpful to understand, the kind of how an application is challenged and the effects of your representations, for example, in response to an office action. That can be something that comes up later in litigation. So just kind of understanding all of the timeline and the anatomy at the Patent and Trademark Office is really helpful as a litigator, and vice versa. Like if you end up on the prosecution counseling side, it's really important to understand how it could be challenged in litigation. But it is hard. I would just say sort of the rhythm of the deadlines of those two areas to do both sort of full time. So typically folks do sort of shake out on one side or the other a few years in.
Interesting. Okay. Well, good. All right, Jered, I'm going to ask you a two-part question and help us segue. So the first one, which you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on if you don't want to, I did want to just ask kind of a COVID update and kind of what you're seeing in your practice and your firm and your clients as it relates to COVID. And for context, people listening later, we're talking on May 13th, 2021. So sometimes things can change quickly with this. But an update on that. And then I also want, as I mentioned, have you segue to talking about something that you learned early in practice in those first couple of years, formative years when you were first getting started, that have stuck with you or an important part of how you practice law today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So for COVID, I would say, at least for myself, there's kind of so far been at least kind of two phases where there was that first few 3, 4, 5 months of that immediate shock, both to clients and the firm and families and the world. And then I feel like, not that it got really any better, but that folks kind of got used to it and started doing Zoom depositions and things of that nature. And so for our firm, we have some clients who've done actually counterintuitively better, whether they're grocery stores or big pharmaceutical companies or online delivery companies. So we have some that have done better, some that have obviously been hurt really bad, movie theater business, things of that nature. Luckily, some of those I think have gotten a lot of help recently with some of the most recent congressional actions, with restaurants getting helped, with the entertainment getting help. So and we have definitely seen kind of an uptick, I think, both in client work and in particular, at least personally for litigation. We didn't really see a huge drop off in the summer of 2020 in transactional prosecution work. But litigation seemed to have kind of frozen up a bit in mid 2020. Right. I think just with all the courthouses being closed and the cases, the deadlines were extended, and people weren't really sure if we were going to get back to being in person in a few months. And so they wanted to wait. And then I think once everyone realized that this is going to be a while, started doing Zoom depots and Zoom hearings, and cases have been filed and, new filings. So I think we're kind of used to it. At this point now, we just sent out an email today about reopening the office and getting folks back in here on still a voluntary basis, but trying to get back closer to normal. So it's been a challenge. I think that probably we've always been pretty flexible with remote work for attorneys and even for paralegals. Just historically, less so for staff or assistants, where we thought we needed them here all the time. I think that's become clear that we don't necessarily. So we'll definitely in the future, even though we were flexible, probably be even more flexible with remote work arrangements. And just the last thing on that too, that just came to mind is I think one benefit of that we've seen, and I've seen clients have seen this as well, is I think from a recruiting perspective, if you decide that you don't need to just look in Austin for a new attorney or a new paralegal or a new X, Y, and Z, you could, and you open up that talent pool. We've you get a lot more folks that maybe you would never have found before.
Sure.
So that's been pretty eye-opening too.
Well, I'm surprised to hear that a little bit, because I thought everybody wanted to live in Austin. So I didn't think that pool was ever restricted geographically for you all.
I think part of the challenge of Austin is just finding them, because I mean it's just so much competition here from big firms moving in to in-house positions to, have so many different companies moving here. So it's kind of crazy right now, a time to be in Austin, but a good time.
Yeah.
So I think the second part was something you learned in the first few years in practice.
Yeah, that stuck with you, that you'd want to pass on.
Yeah, and I think there's larger and smaller things there, and I'm sure Wendy can speak to this too. But in terms of one kind of discrete issue as an associate in a law firm is kind of understanding that all partners practice differently. There's no one right or wrong way to practice. And it's super helpful, and it takes some time, but from my memory, and this is years ago now, it's very helpful to first learn that and kind of learn how that partner that you're working with on this client practices. How do they practice in terms of emails, in terms of what they like to see in terms of interactions with clients. And then, you give them that. And so you give that to them and to the client, and it could be totally 180 degrees different to a different partner, and learning to understand that and not be confused by it or be upset by it, but just that there's different ways of practicing. And to try to mold, each individual client or partner to how they practice, and bring your own type of work to it too. And I think, at least for me, that's benefited my practice a lot moving forward, in that I've tried to take what I like the most from those different partners and clients into how I act as a partner. And so I'm sure there are associates who work with me and expect a certain way. And that's just been from gathering up little bits of gathered from other partners along the way.
Yeah. Wendy, how about for you?
Remind me what the question was.
Filibuster.
Something I learned early on or what you're saying, something I wish I knew early on?
The question was, something that you learned early on that you've kind of hung on to and that's still part of how you practice and that you'd want to pass on.
Oh, goodness. I remember there's advice I remember getting that I wish I had followed. And I
like where that's going.
Well, it's sort of a concept. So Lou Pirkey is one of the founding members of our firm, and he is just so fantastic and such a gentleman and so good at what he does and just such a wonderful human being. And I remember him coming in when I had come in as a lateral, as like a second year, third year attorney. And he came in and he made an observation basically about where there was kind of a gap of like expertise in the field, like nationally. And he basically encouraged me to pursue that, to be that, to try to fill that gap, and because, obviously trademark law is, like we talked about, it feels like a niche, but there are like 100 little niches within trademark law or more.
Right.
And so he was much more senior than I was at the time. And I think it was extremely generous of him to just be like, look, this is something I am in a unique, he didn't say it quite like this, but in retrospect, this is effectively his message, that like he has practiced for many years. He saw this gap. He saw this opportunity for me to sort of make a name for myself in this particular like sub niche of trademark law. And it was not something that I felt like I was interested in. I didn't tell him that, but it wasn't something I felt like I was, sort of had a natural inclination to. And it was also kind of early in my career where I felt like I was a little bit overwhelmed just to begin with. And I was trying to get my bearings. But that, in retrospect, I haven't forgotten that. And I thought that was really sort of a gift for him to have done that and to share his perspective. And I, think about what would have happened if I had actually done that. And I probably would have been a lot more successful than him. No, but, so he, but anyway, and he would do, I would also share something else. He said, that he encouraged me to take a lawyer in Austin out to lunch once a week, somebody that wasn't at the firm. And I am sure he did something very much like that through a lot of his career. And that's how he has just built up just a phenomenal network from that. So, and I remember, again, as a junior associate, that sounds like a lot of time away from billable work. But that's one thing that I think our firm is a little different in that the focus on culture and connections and business development, as opposed to the billable hour, was something I learned really early on. And that was just so freeing for me as a junior associate. So
cool. That's really cool. All right, Wendy, sticking with you here, what is something that you notice in associates that impresses you? What stands out to you and indicates to you that the associate's kind of getting it or is on the right track?
That's such a good question. I love it when associates love what we do. I just love that. And I don't think it's hard to love what we do because we are working brands, we're working with like marketing, we're working with art, we're working with, the challenges of the law, but also with just sort of this kind of fantastic creative side of things that I think a lot of lawyers don't get to see. And so when our associates get that, and when it's, in our recruiting efforts too, we see that in candidates, that just makes my heart sing. It's just, it's so neat because I know that if they love it, then they're going to do a good job. So there's so much that sort of flows from that. And so when they love the work, like when something happens in a case, like we're going to get together and we're going to be really excited about that. And we're going to talk about that. And can you believe that opposing counsel said this or whatever? And, or, they find the case that it like answers the question that we've been looking for and they get all excited about it. And it's like, that just makes work so much more fun for everyone. And it makes it not feel like work. And so when associates have that sort of spark and seem to really connect with the work, that just really adds to, the culture of the firm in such a wonderful, positive way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's, great advice for, whatever area of law you're practicing in. I think if you are exuding interest and enthusiasm for the substantive, things that you're working through and the types of clients you're working with, like it just shows through in so many ways. And the reverse is true. If you're just miserable and you don't like it, it's, it just shows, it's going to show up in your work. It's going to show up in everything. So I think that's really, really good. Jered, how about you?
I think that is the foundational one that leads to other positive things. Because one example I would have is just taking initiative rather than having the partner or the client or paralegal or whoever follow up with you a million times every time, you're taking the initiative and you're showing ownership. That's something that is really important. And I think that ties in with exactly what Wendy said, because it's a lot easier to show initiative if you love what you do. It's a lot easier to show initiative if you're really interested in a case or a matter or a client, or like working with that partner. So I think that, and the converse is true too, right? I mean, if you don't like it, it's a lot easier to say, I can put that aside for now and come back to it another time. And then that ends up hurting you perhaps. So I think initiative, and all that comes with that. But what Wendy said, I think is the most foundational one, which is just loving what you do. And because that just kind of permeates throughout everything. Yeah.
Do either of you have any, like pet peeves or things that you see associates do, like, oh, cringe, like not again?
One thing, I don't know, Wendy, do you have one or do you want me to?
Wendy was really thinking and Jered had one right off the top.
Go ahead, Jered. I'll keep thinking.
No, one thing that comes to mind right away is making the same mistake multiple times. And it's really true. And it's kind of cliche, but it's perfectly fine to mess up. And that's part of learning. And that's part of, growing in every way, life, not just work. But if you've been told this is a mistake and here's how to fix it, and then it happens again and again and again, obviously that's a bad sign, but it's a particular pet peeve because as a supervisor, as a partner, you kind of feel ignored a little bit, I think too. You kind of feel like they're not listening to you, or they're not getting it. So that's definitely a pet peeve is, obviously being super reasonable and learning experience for 1-2 mistakes. But if the same type of mistake keeps happening, I think that's kind of a warning sign.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, I wouldn't necessarily call it a pet peeve, but if it happens enough, I guess it starts to get that way. But like if you get a draft from an associate and you give them feedback and they just say, okay, and they just implement it and send it on. And that's just always how it is. Like I want to feel some kind of back and forth, not like pushback necessarily, but like some back and forth. Like I want to, have you thought about this because I found this in the research or whatever. And this is why I explained it. But if it's like, they never really are engaging with you, they're just sort of like, I will do what you told me to do, and I will send it. It kind of gets back to that, like, are you really engaging with this material? Are you really kind of engaging with the issue? Or is it like, I just have to revise my draft and send it off and check that box and get to the next project? But again, I don't want it to be a bunch of pushback on every time I give feedback. You don't want to either. But you want to feel some sort of like, okay, we're on this team together. Like, I'm a partner, you're an associate, but we're both attorneys and we're both moving through this material together as a team. So I want to hear, like, if you don't agree with the revision I just made, and you want to talk it through, let's talk it through. And I'm not going to be, defensive about that. And I would expect that you wouldn't be, you associate wouldn't be defensive about that either. But like, we're on a team, like we're both, let's figure this out together. And if we engage, we're going to refine and get to a better answer. Whereas if you just always are implementing what I say like a robot, that's not always going to be helpful.
Yeah, that's, I think, super subtle and really important, because like, I think a lot of times the lawyer would feel like if they, implement your feedback and move it along, like they're doing a great job. Like that's like, they're doing exactly what you're asking them to do. And so they may not ever know until you maybe mention it to them or the partner mentions it to them that the fact that they're not engaging is an issue or potentially a problem. And so I'm so glad you said it, because I want associates to be thinking about things like that, like before they just kind of robotically implement every change and move on, like to think about, maybe not all the time, but like you said, like you don't want to push back and not even say pushback, but just like, going in and engaging in a conversation, learning more about why that feedback was what it was, and just trying to learn more about it. I think that's really important and not necessarily intuitive. And people would maybe not know that that's in a partner's mind without having heard you say it just now. So that's, I'm really good.
And I would just go back to Jered's comment though, about how every partner is different. So there may be, I don't speak for all partners. So there could be some that'll be like, why do my associates listen to this podcast? And now they're pushing back on all of my feedback. So
that's right. I'm going to make
that is how I like to work. And I, if I am sensing that from an associate that they're just kind of implementing it, I will start probably adjusting my feedback to make it more of like questions, so that they, don't you think this, or why did you add that? Try to draw them out a little bit as well.
Right. Okay. Well, we're speaking of time going fast. We're at the end of our time, or getting there quickly here. So, I want to give each of you an opportunity to talk about something that we haven't talked about yet. We haven't talked about interviewing and hiring, some work-life balance stuff that we had maybe considered. So you get a kind of open platform here to take however, it's your time, so however long you want, but to maybe something we haven't talked about yet that you'd want to share before we get to our rapid-fire questions to close out. So with that much filibustering to let you get an idea of what you want to say, Jered, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. So as Daniel knows, for the listeners, Wendy and I would come to Baylor to interview kids there and at the law school at Baylor, and we've been to UT and all over the place interviewing together. And so we kind of had a rhythm down when we go out and interview, although it's been a while now to do it in person. And I think that, so every firm's different, every person's different, but a baseline assumption is that, if we're interviewing these people, they have decent grades, they're at a decent law school, they're competent, et cetera. And so much of what we're looking for is, as a really important factor, is personality, and is, how do they fit into our firm? And it's different at our firm than a huge firm, right? Because we have, although we're growing really fast and have 30-something attorneys now, that's still just 30-something attorneys. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very, very different from a firm that has thousands of attorneys. And so part of what we think has made our firm special is being able to make sure we hire not just the best and the brightest, but people who love what they do, who are interested in trademark law, who fit in and get along and aren't mean at like a basic level. They're nice, good people. They want a family life. And, I remember speaking of family life, one of the things that made an impression on me is one of the named partners, Bill Barber. Every day he'd go home around 4:45 or 5 o'clock to be with his kids for after school and for dinner. And putting them down to bed. And he, it was very consistent with him. And so, that part of it and, being just good, decent people is really important. And part of that too is, especially with a firm our size, we want or hope that most, if not all people will make partner one day. Yeah. And so that's very, very different from a model in which 1 out of 10 would make partner one day.
Right.
And so that's really important. And it could be an exception because of the size of our firm. But I think that there are a lot of firms that start out small and get to our size. And I think one of the reasons we've done really well is recruiting those types of people.
Yeah. And if y'all haven't figured it out yet, these are 2 of my favorite people in the law firm world. And so everything they just said accurately reflects both themselves and their firm. So absolutely. Wendy, how about you?
Yeah, that's a kind of a big, empty, kind of open question. But I guess I would speak to kind of just how I feel like when I was an associate or when I was a law student, I felt that, I had to make a lot of sacrifices in order to be successful at a law firm. Mm-hmm. And so I'm, at this point, I made partner in 2012. So I think it was like in my 8th year. I had a child at that point. I have another child now. I have a husband who works full time. Jered and I are both on the management committee of our firm. And there's a third that handles management. And I'm really doing well. I'm really happy. I have hobbies on the side. I do things on the side. I spend time with my family. And I guess I would just speak, not just to women, but sometimes, usually women are affected more, but even, men that want to have a strong family life as well, that it's possible. And I think if you get into a firm where that you're not seeing that from the senior folks, and you're seeing kind of miserable, kind of bitter, dried out people at the senior level, it's probably time to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And just, taking stock of like, what is you want your life to look like? Mm-hmm. and how important is money? How important is the name of the firm? And just considering how short life is and kind of thinking about what you want. And our firm pays well. It doesn't pay, like the Quinn Emanuels or whoever the mm-hmm. top players are these days. I'm probably dating myself. I don't know the highest back in the day, but right. But it's also a great living. And I would also, I guess, challenge any kind of senior folks that are listening too. If you are on leadership of a firm like that, where people are miserable, maybe things should change. And this time right now with COVID kind of interrupting the world, I think it's a good opportunity to start kind of taking a very global look at how you are doing things and potentially making some adjustments. So I think our firm does things really, really well, but it could be different and it could be better. It always can be. And that's been neat to start out, from very early on, to see that openness from the leadership, even at that point, about improving quality of life. And then it's been neat to be on leadership with Jered and our third managing member, to really affect that and to question things. We've always done it this way. Why? We can change it. And we do have the luxury of a, relatively small firm to do that. But I do sometimes question, like, how hard is it, to make people's lives better? And I think sometimes there's some tweaks that can be made and some demands that can be lessened and maybe some salaries to be dropped a bit to sort of accommodate for a better quality of life. So I guess I would just say you don't have to sacrifice your whole life to be happy as an attorney at a firm. But you also have to find the right fit. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, and that's super encouraging. In fact, it follows a conversation we had a few weeks ago with another Austin lawyer. I don't know if you would have run across her, Danielle Ulrich, who is a partner at Todd Martin's state tax lawyer, and it's at Reed Smith now. But she talked a lot about those things that you were just mentioning, Wendy, and had a real passion for that too. And especially as the leadership firms start to transition into folks of our generation, I'll just use that broadly, and you find myself that opportunity exists to make those changes happen, especially like you said, post-COVID. So
I was going to say real quick, I think you're going to see a demand for it too from younger folks, especially post-COVID, like you said. I mean, I think it's harder for the big firms because they're ocean liners trying to turn a ship around, or even an inch. But I think it's starting to happen a bit, but it's going to happen even more just because, the associates can go somewhere else.
That's right. Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. Okay. Rapid fires, one word, one phrase to answer these questions and finish out our time. Are you all ready?
Sure.
Do it.
Right. Very, very hesitant with that one.
First.
All right. We'll start with Jered and go to Wendy after that. All right. Name one trait or characteristic that you most want to see in an associate.
Enthusiasm.
Joy.
Joy. There you go. All right. Jered, what habit has been key to your success?
Maybe I want an associate who's like me, but I would say enthusiasm. Yeah.
I would say relationships.
Awesome. All right. Your favorite app or productivity tool? You guys, extra burden on you, the IP folks, to have something cool to say here, but.
Oh, man. Seriously. Favorite?
Slack. I heard Slack. Yeah.
Slack. I will say, if I'm allowed more than just one word, Slack, we talked about doing Slack and did it weeks before or as the pandemic was hitting. And that has been huge for our law firm, actually. In terms of communicating with folks, especially post-COVID, but even I think pre and COVID, it's taken away from having to mass email everybody, and you can just direct message folks. That's been amazing. So Slack for productivity. I like following news on Twitter, but that's probably the anti-productivity app. So it's probably not the best one.
There you go. All right, your favorite social distancing activity?
So I will say Wendy and I, as two of the recruiting folks at the firm, had to set up a whole essentially socially distant Zoom summer last year.
Yeah.
And my favorite one event that we had, which was super social distance because it's all on Zoom, but there was an escape game, but was all done by Zoom, where there was someone with a 360-degree camera inside of the escape room. So that was super fun.
That's cool. Yeah.
It was really cool. People have gotten really creative.
No, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I know Zoom happy hours was definitely a thing back in like the spring and summer. And then I think it kind of wore itself out at some point. It sounded like.
Yeah, it gets exhausting.
I'll say we did in connection with the summer program, we did a painting thing, and that was fun. Like we had like all the materials were sent to your house, and then you just set it up, and we all did it together, and then showed each other. So that was fun. That was cool.
I have to add one last thing. We took our kiddo to his first. Now we've done a few of them. His first ever drive-in movie theater.
Yeah,
which was super fun.
That's cool. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of movies, favorite legal movie? Last question. Big sighs from both. Trying to think.
I'm sure you get this all the time, but like I really don't like legal stuff. They're always so wrong. They're always like.
Wait, have you ever seen the firm?
The lawyers are like introducing stuff, and you're like, that is completely the wrong way to introduce that thing into evidence. But let me think. I mean, Legally Blonde is so fun.
Yeah, that's a popular answer for sure. Yeah.
You got into Harvard, like it's hard. I mean, how can you compete with that?
It's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say The Firm, but only because there's not a lot of really any courtroom. It's just like a thriller.
Yeah, there's classic. Not. It counts, and it definitely counts, and it doesn't have hardly any actual lawyering in it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why it's such a great lawyer movie, because there's very little lawyering done.
Awesome. Well, Jered, Wendy, thanks again so much for taking the time to come on the show. I really appreciate it, and wish you all the best and wish your firm the best, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks. Same to you.
Daniel.
This is fun. Thanks, Daniel.
All right. My thanks again to Wendy and Jered for joining us on the show today. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider doing two things for me? Would you subscribe so you don't miss an episode? And then would you rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen? And if you have suggestions or thoughts about the show, or if I could help you in any way, please email me, Daniel@VarsitySearch.com. VeeFriends.com. And also don't forget, we've got just a lot of opportunities out there around the state and a lot of practice areas. So if you're interested in talking about those, please get in touch with me and I'd be happy to visit with you. All right, that's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we'll talk with you next time.